Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to a special edition of OpenShift TV. This is the Call for Code for Racial Justice mini-series that we've been doing lately. Today we're talking about the Legit Info project, and to kind of tell you more about Call for Code for Racial Justice and more specifically what we're talking about today, I will hand it off to Demi. Demi, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having us here today, Chris.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Demi Ajayi. I'm the open source community manager here at Call for Code for Racial Justice. And today we have with us a few people from our Legit Info team, and I'll let them introduce themselves before telling you guys a little bit more about Call for Code for Racial Justice.
We'll do it alphabetically or?
However you want.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
I'm Tony Pearson. I'm the lead developer on Call for Code, Legit Info, and we'll be doing a live demo and presenting some hands-on labs to go with it.
Hey, I'm Tommy Adams. I'm kind of a miscellaneous person on the team since the beginning with Tony. Did a little bit of testing, very little coding, a lot of research and documentation, just kind of any odd jobs that the team had for me.
Hey everyone, my name is Upkar. I am a developer on the project and also work with all of Call for Code for Racial Justice projects.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. And again, as I said, I am the Call for Code for Racial Justice open source community manager. If you've been part of this series, you'll notice that I'm a guest here. Usually we have Sabine Justaline, who is the product manager for Call for Code for Racial Justice hosting, but she's unable to join us today. She's feeling under the weather, so we're hoping she gets better real soon. So again, this is our third episode of this series. The first two episodes, we had fair change and open sentencing as part of the series. And today we'll be talking about Legit Info, but just a little bit more about what Call for Code for Racial Justice is. Essentially, we're currently all IBMers. So this emerged out of an initiative that was launched by IBM, which is the Embrace Initiative, which is a diversity and inclusion initiative within IBM that really wanted to, do some work to really make some change. So as part of that, we had a call to action where we launched a spot challenge for Call for Code within Call for Code, which is our Tech for Good platform. It's hosted by the David Clark Cause. That has an annual event every year to support global challenges around social issues. So last year we were focused on, for the spot challenge, on tackling systemic racism. And the plan was essentially to have different people within IBM and within Red Hat to contribute to building open source technologies that would address issues around three different pillars. We have police and judicial reform and accountability, which we talked about with fair change and open sentencing a bit, as well as legislation reform, which we're going to talk about today with Legit Info, and also diverse representation. So Call for Code for Racial Justice has now grown to be a full-fledged program under Call for Code within IBM. But as I mentioned before, we're open source. We've externalized our solutions. They're now on the Linux Foundation, 7 of our solutions, including Legit Info, which we'll hear about more today. We're definitely looking forward to telling you more about the solution and finding a way for you guys to get involved as well. So now I hand it over to the team to talk through more about the solution, how they got to where they are today, and we'll kind of try to make this conversational. So if you have any questions, do put them into the chat, and we'll also try to field the questions to the team as well.
All right. Oops. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Tommy, why don't you start off with talking about the problem statement?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of background on the specific problem that we're looking at. And as Demi said, our group focused on the legislation and policy reform area. And within that specifically, the problem statement that we were kind of most interested in was listed here. And that's concerned citizens and impacted residents don't have a straightforward way of knowing what or how policies and legislation affect them or what they can do in response. And so as we kind of dug a little bit deeper into that problem statement, what we really found is that there's a couple of, there's several issues here, but a lot of it has to do with legislation itself. Legislation, one, it's very hard to find. You have government websites, but you have to kind of sift through their pages, go through different sessions. You really have to know how to navigate to find what you're looking for. There's also usually no good, search mechanisms there, so you're really kind of limited to knowing specifically what you're looking for, knowing what bill number you're looking for to actually find it on their website. Once you find it, you run into the other problem of it's very hard to understand, right? The legislation is typically there's a lot of legalese, there's a lot of political speak in there, so it's difficult for the average person to really understand what they're reading and get to the kind of the core of what that legislation means. And then in dealing with Call for Code for Racial Justice, we also found some impacts specifically towards people of color. You can kind of see the figure 2 over here we have on the right. People of color are more likely to report racial discrimination when trying to vote or even participate in politics. And so this could be something, that's easily seen, like, poll blockers or somebody interfering with elections. But it can also be things that are a little bit more discreet. Senators or congressmen disproportionately favoring emails or correspondence with wider sounding constituents. So things like that you can't really see that are a little bit behind the scenes. And so what we were trying to really do with our project with Legit Info was to make legislation more accessible and more easier to understand for everyone. Right. So Tony, if you want to go into the next chart here.
There we go.
All right, so what is Legit Info? So our solution is a web-based application. Its primary goal is connecting users with the legislation of interest based on their preferences for impact areas and geographical location. So basically what this means is we're trying to make it easier to access this legislation, bills that are upcoming, bills that are existing now, things that are about to be voted on. We want to make it easily accessible and easily understandable. We want people to be able to find the information that they're looking for without having to jump through a bunch of hoops to get there. And so some of the current features that we have, it's an interactive website, both mobile and tablet compatible. It allows users to research either anonymously if they choose to, or they can register with the site and save their settings for future sessions. And then, of course, they can search the legislation based on their location or on impact areas that they're concerned with. And then they can actually save and share those results with other people as well. All right, next chart. All right, so a really kind of high-level process of how Legit Info works. First and foremost, we have a collaborative effort going on with Legiscan. So Legiscan, if you're not familiar with it, is another third-party website, and they do a really great job of manually collecting and collating all of this information from all these different state and federal government websites, basically pulling all of this legislation down and putting it onto a single pane of glass for people to search on. So while they do a really great job of consolidating all that information, they still don't really classify the information or make it easier to find what you're actually looking for. They make it easier to find because it's all in one place, but you still kind of have to know what you're looking for to be able to get to it. And so in our collaboration with Legiscan, we actually run a batch process where we access their REST API every week. We download all the pertinent legislation updates, anything that's been updated over the past week in both PDF and HTML format, kind of depending on which state is being scanned or which state is submitting their data. They submit it in different formats. We take all of this information and we pre-process it to extract the text from those files. And then we send that text to Watson Natural Language Understanding. That lets us identify the key topics for each of those legislative documents. And then from there, we take the processed files and the impact areas, save them out to our Legit Info database, and then make them easily accessible via the web application so that you can start searching by topic and location.
Awesome. So I just had a few questions here. This is cool. Obviously, I know a little bit about Legit Info, but it's always great to hear from the people who developed it a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit about what challenges, like what was the biggest challenge in kind of trying to pull this together as a solution?
I'll start. One of the big challenges was that we had a very short time window. We were only given 6 weeks to try to develop a workable system. And anyone who's worked with artificial intelligence knows that 6 weeks isn't even enough to train models correctly. And we were also struggling at that time before we found Legiscan, finding source data to work with. You can't train a model unless you have actual source data to work with. And the first few weeks, not wasted, but spent design thinking who would use the tool and who are we trying to deliver this for. and trying to interview people who would use something like this and come up with what are their requirements. So one of the requirements was anonymous search, which we were surprised at, but a lot of people are concerned that their searches might be tracked somehow. And so having an anonymous search feature seemed like one of the first requirements we tried to implement.
Interesting. And actually, as you're speaking about your design thinking session, do you have an idea now of who your ideal user would be?
We've identified the advocate. We call them the advocate. Generally, someone who is computer savvy, but may be have a set of social media followers, or is leading an effort of local activism to encourage people to vote, to encourage people to protest, to encourage people to call their legislators. And so rather than trying to think that this is affecting everybody, we aimed for having an advocate who would use the tool and then use that to drive their next steps, their next actions, being able to share that information with their followers, and along with the information, say, here's how we need to act. Here's what we need to do next. And that's kind of the results of our design thinking effort.
Interesting. And did you guys have any like ethical considerations as you were developing this? Any things you thought about in how you developed it? You kind of mentioned anonymous search. Are there other things that came up through your design thinking or through like actual implementation of this solution?
That was the main one. We added later the ability to save, register as a user, and to be able to do additional functions if you registered your information. And if you are an activist, one of the things is that you can be an activist for people or things that can't vote. The people for the ethical treatment of animals are representing animals that can't vote. There are people who focus on immigration reform, and the immigrants may not be able to vote, or children and children's safety, and children cannot vote. So sometimes the advocates have to act on behalf of the people who are actually affected by some of the impacts from this legislation.
Okay, interesting.
One of the other things that I thought was interesting, talking about like ethics while going through this, one of the things that we were trying to also do with Legit Info is to reduce bias in, how we're classifying some of these things. You look at a lot of bills, and depending on the news source you go to, you can get wildly different stories about what the bill actually entails. Something as simple as a grant for public education. You have one side that's very pro, education is positive, pro for the bill, but then another side that's looking completely at the financial aspect of it is saying that, it's going to increase your taxes. So you can get positive and negative. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, and while we went more with the machine learning approach, is that kind of take away that bias and just look at what is the core of the bill, what topics does the bill impact, and you can kind of form your own opinion on it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually that reminds me of our other solution, Take Two, the one that's about diverse representation and trying to identify that kind of bias, specifically racial bias in text. So I'm wondering if there's actually possible synergies between your solution here and maybe also like anything as far as like media articles. Yeah, so that's a great point about natural language understanding. I actually was the product manager for Watson Natural Language Understanding. It's always very interesting to see it being applied in different solutions. Can you talk a little bit more, either Tommy or Tony, about how you guys use NLU specifically and how it's been a help to you?
Sure. The initial MVP, minimal viable product, we didn't have Watson NLU, so we were hand curating all the legislation. We were reading the dozens or hundreds of pages of legislation and trying to summarize it into a impact to say, having read this document, the impact is this. And so we were hand classifying individual legislation and then putting it in the database, and then you could search from that. And it was terribly manual. I mean, it's to say the least, it wasn't sustainable. And after the 6 weeks were over, our team was given the opportunity to enhance the tool to get additional help from others who were Watson NLU knowledgeable to help implement the NLU capabilities. So currently today, when we are processing the PDF and HTML files, we extract the raw text, and that text is then processed by NLU. We didn't have to train NLU. It already can read English and understand English terminology. So that saved a lot of training time. And what NLU does is gives us 10 phrases that it considered to be the most important phrases for this document. So it could be phrases that then reflect whether it is healthcare related or related to safety or transportation. And then what we had to do was map the thousands of phrases that it came up with to a set of impacts that would standardize the results of that. So it's a kind of a two-step process. And I kind of relate it to using your dishwasher, right? When you wash dishes, the dishwasher is an automated thing, but we had to rinse the dishes before they go in the dishwasher. And then when you take the dishes out of the dishwasher, you have to then clean out all the spots and everything else of the few dishes that weren't quite cleaned. No dishwasher is perfect. And so Watson NLU is like a dishwasher. It does 90% of the work, but we did have to pre-process the text from the PDF and HTML to get it to be usable for Watson. And then once Watson came out with the top 10 themes or phrases, we had to then interpret that to put it into the impact categories that we had chosen.
Right. And how did you guys get connected? Go ahead, Ukar.
Oh, I was just going to add that that's interesting to me that it's not a classification exercise. It's not like you're looking at a legislation and saying, does this classify as healthcare versus safety versus, right? It's going the other way around. So not limiting or by the impacts that the solution considers, right? So in this case, Watson comes out with, does it happen, Tony, that it comes up with impact areas or words that are not listed in our impacts?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, we anticipate that there's going to be legislation that doesn't apply to the impact areas we're interested in, right? Yeah. So, for example, military spending. Well, we're not interested in military spending, and there could be military spending bills, and all of the themes that it comes up with are military oriented, and it doesn't match any of our impact areas. So it would be classified as none, as not one of the 5 impact areas we're interested in. So there were quite a few of those. Some legislation, for example, erected statues for, famous people, or removed statues of famous people. Same thing, did not classify as any of the 5 impact areas that we had. So it gets, summarized as none. So absolutely, rather than trying to come up with a traditional classification machine learning language, we thought this was the better approach. It allows us to add and remove impact categories without having to rewrite or retrain the model.
Okay, actually, that's
one other interesting application of this, and this is something that I think is something that could be applied in the future, but it's not on there now. But the model that we use allows us to do this is we can actually look for riders on bills as well. So you have 10 impact areas and 80% of them have to do with healthcare, but then for some reason you have 2 of them that have to do with finance or something that might be a good indicator that you actually have an addendum to the bill that's not really part of the initial bill, but it's something that, stands out.
Exactly.
Interesting. All right. So that brought up 2 questions for me. The first one is related to like the source of truth and choosing the impact areas, right? Like how did you guys decide what governs the impact areas that you want to show? And how might we think about doing that in the future, right? For instance, maybe military spending, we didn't think was relevant, but if someone else in the open source community thinks like that's actually relevant, how do you go about deciding that so far today?
Right. This is the problem with design thinking, in that, the limited number of people that we interviewed, we then culled it down to 5 impact areas and chose that as our initial set of impact areas that we chose. And I'll be showing those soon. And we chose initially Ohio and Arizona because we had websites and documentation that we could use. And we had people from Ohio and Arizona on the team who could make sense of some of the more subtleties listed in the document. And that's kind of how it worked out. Now we've designed it so that you can have any of the 50 states. We designed it so you can modify programmatically or not program in the database. You can list the locations and the impact categories. So if you want to add and remove impact categories, we made that very possible without having to have anything hard coded into the code. And as a result of that, if we interviewed 20 different people, we might have had 5 different impact categories. It just happened to be, we spent the first 2 weeks just trying to discuss who was the advocate and what impacts might they be interested in doing, in looking at. If we had interviewed 50 soccer moms, we might have had more things related to education for children and school safety and so on. And if we had interviewed other categories in different states, they might have different priorities.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, I guess it definitely creates like a opportunity for thinking more about how we want to develop this further down the line as well. The other question I had was related to Legiscan. Can you talk a little bit more about how you guys got connected with them? And it seems as if it made your jobs a lot easier, but can you just give them a bit more explanation as to how you were connected with them?
Yeah, I would say that we had a real struggle trying to figure out, when it was originally just curated data, if we found legislation, we could curate it, summarize it, give it a title, give it a summary, give it an impact and a location, and put it into the database manually. But when we wanted to try to get it more formalized with repositories, we found that every state has its own different repository, and a different website and a different web page, and screen scraping was just not something we wanted to do. Screen scraping is often a matter of getting the raw HTML of each page and trying to extract elements from it and follow links until you find the attached documents. And that's complicated for a single website and multiplied by 50 because there's no standards between each state's websites. Each state develops its own way of doing things in all 50 states. We also didn't want to limit it to United States only. We could have used this in the UK or Europe or developing countries. So, we were trying to decide, a balance between individual locations, states, websites, and some more centralized repository. And we reviewed quite a few attempts at trying to consolidate legislation. And Legiscan, we chose because it had a nice API. It has both a free and a paid version. And because we worked out with Legiscan how we could implement this with just a free user ID, so we wouldn't have to scan and cause too much effort on their servers. We didn't want to generate too much CPU load against them. For the free scan, we can do it with a minimal amount of impact to their servers so that they can continue to use the free user ID and the REST API. And so that worked out well. We talked to the Legiscan people, told them what we're trying to implement, and so they're very cooperative.
Awesome. So thank you guys. And thank you, Legiscan, for supporting this effort. All right. So what is next, guys?
Okay. So the let me first give an overview of the architecture, and then I'll do a live demo. And so the instance here is the web application. The user would access it normally through a browser. And this could be on a desktop or a laptop. It could be a tablet. It could be a smartphone. And we are able to then access the web pages, do our searches. We have the option to save CSV files of the results we find. We're also able to email the results to ourselves so that we can then forward it on to our followers, but by adding some additional comments to it. So rather than emailing it directly to our followers randomly, we thought it'd be better that you email it to yourself and then you forward it on to your team to say, look at the list below, let's take action, let's meet Saturday to discuss it, let's, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought that was a better approach based on our conversations with activists. Our data sources, you can see here, we extract from Legiscan and we store them in an internal database already organized, filtered, categorized with the location and impact. And we have a user directory so that people can register, sign up, and save all their settings so they can come back and everything is where they left off. So that is our architecture. And so let me jump to a demo. And I will jump to here. Okay, hello. No, it's not letting me do that.
Weird.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, it's the Zoom thing seems to drop down right when I need it.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so
Zoom
this
box.
is the legit info screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
So initially, you're not signed in. You're just an anonymous person. And as an anonymous person, you can implement a search and we can hit the search button and you could do that. Now we've made it so that it is fully responsive in that if you're on a tablet mode, it shrinks down correctly. If you're on a smartphone, the menu on the top gets changed to a pull down menu. And when it's a wider screen, then the menu comes out on cross. All of the choices here work regardless of the size of your request. And as an anonymous search, you can say, I'm interested in, let's say Tucson, Arizona, and I'm interested in healthcare, safety, and transportation. So you can check multiple impact areas. And then when you do the search, it would then identify the search there, and you can see the title. We actually have the bill name, so you know that this is from 2018, HB 2001. It affects all of Arizona, not just Tucson, and summarizes it there. We list only a few per page, and then you can go to the next page and look at those next pages and so on. So we did that. You can, at any time, print the page out or download it as a CSV file. And the CSV file is nice because then you can run it through other reports or forward it onto your team. Or you can go back and say, I want to search something else. I want to search Ohio. So let's say we go to Columbus, Ohio, and now I'm interested in environment and jobs. And I can now search a different state. And here again, I have the titles and the summaries of the different things. I can say that some of these are based on jobs. Some of these are classified as an impact to an environment. So you can see that for that. So again, at the bottom, you can see that there are thousands of legislations found that you can do this. Now let's take a quick look at which impacts we have. These are the 5 impacts we have: healthcare, safety, environment, transportation, jobs. Again, that was the result of our design thinking. We needed to pick just something that were relatively unique and different that we can find legislation for. And that's how we've classified our legislation. If you look at the locations, we have a hierarchical search. So in this case, all the states relate to the United States, and then counties relate to the states, and then cities relate to the counties. We've structured this so that it can work with all of United States and all of the districts and on other countries. It could be provinces and districts and towns. Whatever your country is, we can probably organize the hierarchy to do this. So if I chose Columbus, Ohio as my designated location of interest, then I would find any legislation that was a city ordinance for Columbus. I would find any counties that were related to Franklin County, so it affects all members of Franklin County, including Columbus, Ohio. I would also look for any statewide initiatives for the state of Ohio, and then I would find any federal legislation related to the state of United States. So when you pick a location, it doesn't limit it to just city ordinances. It can actually find all of the things related to that location at the government hierarchy, the way it's organized. So I think that was another key thing there. You wouldn't have to do 4 searches. I mean, otherwise you'd have to search Columbus, and then you'd have to search Franklin County, and then you'd have to search Ohio, and then you'd have to search United States. And we did it all for you on a single search.
Nice.
We can also register ourselves. So I can say Frank123, right? And let's give it a password. And we register. And here, when we do the registration, we can say Frank. And we can then pick their location. We'll say that they live in Cleveland, that they're interested in Cleveland, and we can save some of their settings that they're interested in these 3, and we save those changes. And let's go ahead and add. All right, so now we're logged in. It says Hello Frank at the upper right corner. So when I do a search, I have it all preloaded. I have it loaded with Cleveland, Ohio, and I have it loaded. But that doesn't stop me from doing other searches. I could say, well, even though I'm located in Cleveland, I'm going to search for Cincinnati. And even though these are my normal defaults, I'm going to add jobs and remove safety. And I can still do the search from that. It just pre-populates the standard default for that. So you can see here, I have jobs, healthcare, and environment. And again, it would be city ordinances for Cincinnati, county ordinance for the county that Cincinnati's in, which is different than the county that Columbus is in. And then the state of Ohio, which would affect everybody in Ohio, and then federal laws as well. So that's, you can see, very flexible way to do it. And we designed it so that advocates don't have to be expert search ninjas in terms of trying to figure out how to find stuff. We really try to make it accessible and easy to say, these are the impact areas I'm interested in. These are the locations. This is the communities of interest that I want to do. You can always look at your profile, and if you want to change that profile, you can update it to say, okay, I want to change. I moved from Cleveland, Ohio to Cincinnati, so now I am less interested now in safety and more interested in transportation. And you can save those changes, and you can now make that possible. We also have the ability, and I will sign out here, to sign in as an admin, and I already have the user ID and password loaded, in which case, when you log in as an administrator of the application, you get the admin button. And here in the admin button, you get to actually see all the database tables we have. This allows you to reset the passwords of individual users who say, hey, I forgot my password. Can you reset it for me? You could look at the laws, for example. And if you look at the laws, you can choose to add laws. You can change the laws if you wanted to. you could modify the classifications. Let's say that you want to look at, you can create, you can add a citation in the law if you wanted to. You could change the key. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, but you could manually enter that.
Who would have access to that kind of
Yeah, I
capability
was
though?
just wondering.
Well, I would say if you're running the website for a group of activists, you would have an IT person who would be in charge of that. You could, for example, here's all the locations if you wanted to modify them. Here's all the impacts if you want to add or remove impact areas. We have tasks to do the batch jobs. You can schedule when those tasks run. For example, we have our downloading the Legiscan data sets runs. The next time we'll be running on the 13th of June or whenever the next time is, and so on. You can schedule these to run weekly, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, however you want to do that. So somebody would have to be the administrator, at least initially, to set it up for, if you wanted to set this up for the state of Minnesota, then you would have somebody who would make sure that Minnesota was listed, that you'd have the impact areas that you were interested in, and then make it available to the activists who needed to do the searches that they wanted to search. And that would depend on, whoever's sponsoring this or making this available to their communities, to their advocates.
Right. And because there's no central website for anyone to look at this right now. They can only download local copies of it, essentially, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we have copies running in the cloud just for our own test purposes. But if we wanted to deploy this somewhere, it's open source. People can download it onto their servers and try it out for themselves. Sign up for a Legiscan user ID. Sign up for Watson NLU, sign up for IBM Cloud Object Storage, and completely have a fully running system with minimal effort. All right, so that is it in a nutshell. I think I went through my entire script showing how that all works. So I will then go back to and I think I'm going to hand the torch. I'm going to talk this chart, and then I'll hand the torch over to Upkar. But what we ended up doing was we had 3 stages for deployment. The first stage was for development and test. We tried to keep it simple so it could run on a local file system with a very simple database, SQLite 3. The application has written in Python, has a single user run server that's built into Django, and Django also has a queue cluster to do batch processing. You could use cron if you are on a local system as well, and a web browser with a single user, and you can do all of that with curated content without having to use Legiscan or the Watson NLU. And that might get people started so they can see how it works and validate things. And then in the transition phase, we're able to move the local file system, which contains all the PDF and HTML of the legislation we've downloaded, into either a network attached storage, a NAS, or we're using IBM Cloud Object Storage. We can support either of those. And instead of just the SQLite 3, we're using a more robust database called PostgreSQL that we have running in the cloud. So it's a centralized repository. And now what's on premise is just the application. We're switching from the run server to a more formal Gunicorn and continuing with the queue cluster. But this now with Gunicorn allows us to have multiple users. In this case, you could have a browser, tablet, and mobile phones accessing the application to make sure that everything looks responsive and is spaced and positioned correctly. And then once you're finally ready to run in production, here, what we do is we move the application, the Gunicorn, and the batch processing with the queue cluster in the cloud. And so the only thing you have locally would be your browser, your tablet, or your mobile phone. And so this transition really helped getting people on board. People could download the code and do the development and testing locally, get familiar with it without affecting anybody, and then getting into transition mode, learning PostgreSQL, learning cloud object storage, learning the Watson NLU algorithms, and keeping the application itself running on premise so you can still debug it, stop and trace activity there. And then once you are ready to move all of that into the cloud for production, you're in a much better position. So I will then pass the torch over to Upkar, who will then explain our latest deployment using Code Engine.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So this is how this diagram is showing the current site that Tony was demoing on. And essentially what we did was each component of the application, we created separate Docker files and containerized that portion of the app and have them run separately on this platform called IBM Code Engine. But it's all containerized, so it's should be possible to move it to other platforms as well. And we'll look at the code pretty soon here. But Code Engine has this two components, sort of big components. One is the concept of an application that users can access from the outside. And then there's this concept of a job, which are basically run in the background, process something, and then die. And so the top part here is the application. User comes in. The numbers, we didn't put that in the chart here, but the numbers basically tell the flow of users coming in, and then how the application interacts with Postgres. We are using a Postgres service on IBM Cloud. And then at the bottom, you'll see there are the three jobs that Tony talked about. So there's the get datasets job, which retrieves the different datasets for the different locations. And then there's the extract files, which extracts the legislation out of the zip files that came through in the get datasets job. And then finally, the analyze text uses the NLU function. And these jobs are set to run on a weekly basis. And that's, again, there's a way to do that with the Code Engine stuff. And then again, using cloud object storage as the persistence layer in our deployed application. So Tony, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. Yep. Cool. So yeah, we have a couple of places for folks to start on, right? So Tony and I created this lab, and actually maybe I'll share my screen and show it as well.
You want to do that? Or do you want to go through these charts and then switch to the screen?
Okay, let's do that. I always listen to Tony. Yeah.
Okay. So go through these next 2 or 3 slides, and then we'll go into the interactive portion that you can show.
Gotcha. Okay. So, but the link's right on top. That's the first thing. So if you want to try it out on your own later on, Chris, if you don't mind sharing that link.
Already did.
In the chat.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. So when you land on this page, there's a button to log into the lab environment, and you have a couple of different choices or options here to log in. I have an IBM ID, so I use that. A lot of folks use GitHub if you have a GitHub account, and you can use any one of these social buttons to log into the environment.
And the lab, there's no cost to it, lab, to do this?
There is no cost to that. Correct. There is no cost to the lab. It's self-paced. And the next screenshots will show you it's a very sort of guided concept. So thank you. So you can see this is the lab environment, works in the browser. That's all you need to start it. On the left-hand side, we have the different steps that you will go through if you do the lab. And on the right side, we have a editor. Looks very much like VS Code. And so you can, if you're familiar with that, you can open the terminal, you can click on the little files thing to see all of the files that are in this lab. And then at the end of the lab, we also have this launch application button on top. So you can tell it to open a certain port and actually see your application running locally in the lab environment itself.
So what do I need besides a browser on my laptop to do this?
A keyboard? No, you need that's all you need.
That's nothing. I
YouTube
don't
just-
have to have Python running on my laptop. I don't have to have
Correct.
any of this, right? I could just use a browser and I am launched into this skills network that has all of the stuff on it.
Nice.
That's correct. So it's a lab environment that has Python already installed. The steps go through installing some of the other dependencies that the lab needs or the solution is built on. For example, Django, right? And then it has a couple of other utilities. So, for example, IBM Cloud CLI. There's a portion of the lab that has you deploy this application on IBM Cloud under your own account as a Cloud Foundry application. And so that IBM Cloud CLI is also in there. So yeah, it's the reason for doing it this way was, versus the other route you can take, of course, is go through the README file and do it locally on your system, but then you have to install those different things. So all of that is given.
It should be the same steps: installing Python, installing Django, installing Bootstrap, but going through all of those procedures.
Mhm.
It would be the same steps, correct?
Yeah.
So if we go one more, there we go. And then this is the other thing we try to make it easier for our users, right? So I think Demi mentioned part of this is, you're interested in helping out with this project, but also you might want to learn more, right? So let's say you want to learn about Django, or you want to learn about how the Django queue scheduler works to under the hood, or the Django admin site. And so this lab goes through all of that as well. So it's a good learning opportunity as well. So to make that a little bit easier, the instructions, we kept them short on the left-hand side. There's a next and previous and continue button that you can use to move back and forth between the instructions. And then any command that we want you to type, there's a handy copy button. So you click on that copy button, and then you can paste it in the terminal, which is shown on the next slide. Here we go. So on the editor side, you can go terminal, new terminal, and in there you can paste it. I think Tony took these screenshots, so very nice of you, Tony, to say Control V or Control Shift V.
It depends on whether you're running a Windows or a Mac. You might have to be a Command V instead of a Control V. It seemed it was just slightly different in each operating system. So I kind of said, figure it out for your own, how to get the copy to work.
There we go. I think the right click also works. The right click and
and then paste. Yeah.
Yep. There you go.
Yep.
When in doubt.
So
when in doubt.
A lot of different ways to paste copy. I think that's the one thing developers get really great at very quickly. So
Yes.
that shouldn't be a problem. All right.
Well, that's a good skill for all open source people to learn how to do, is copy and paste.
There you go. Okay. So I think this was the last one. Yeah.
Yes. This is the last page.
Okay.
So let's switch now. I will stop sharing and let you take over the screen.
Thank you. Ooh. Wow.
Ooh,
What happened?
that happened.
Oh my.
Yikes. Okay.
My terminal does that sometimes. All right. So I have the lab open here. By the way, thanks to Tony, I've been using Linux for 5 months now. I saw Tony using it, and it looked pretty cool. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go full time. I haven't opened my MacBook for a bit now.
Nice.
And it's been great. All right, so here's the lab. Actually, let me open the other window just so you can see.
I should mention that we've designed this tool while you're doing that, the Python and Django can run natively on Linux, Windows, or Mac, the way it's structured, so that all the instructions are based on Linux, but don't let that scare you. It can be implemented on Windows or Mac as well. Fully supported. So if you have a Windows machine or a Mac machine, you want to download the code and run it locally with your own local Python compiler and your own everything else, have at it, because it's not limited to Linux, and don't let that stop you from anything.
Cool.
All right, of course, I'm super secure this way. So I'm going to switch to the other window where I'm already signed in instead of pulling up my phone and the authentication app and all of that. So I'm already signed in here. So let me do another Access Quick Lab. This should open the environment. We do say this lab takes 120 minutes to complete, but we noticed you can get through it a lot faster as well. that 120 minutes is, if you want to learn more about the different components and the technologies used, so, you might do step one, then you Google a bunch of stuff to learn more and come back. But yeah, I think maybe 20 to 30 minutes is generally good to go through the lab. Good enough. Okay, so you can see here on the left is a quick project overview. On the right is my editor. I'm not going to go through the lab, but let's just do the first couple of steps. Tony, I love the music cues you're giving.
Yeah, I'm turning off all my phones. I apologize. I should have done
No
that sooner.
problem. No problem.
Yeah.
It's nice. All right,
There
so
we
here's
go.
an example.
Too many phones.
Here's an example. So git version, I copy it here and I can paste it here and enter. Boom. I have git installed, which is nice. Oops, let me go back one more. And let's see if I have Python here. And I do have Python 3.6.9 that comes with the environment. And then we're using pipenv to create a virtual environment and manage all of our packages in that virtual environment. So right here, I installed pipenv using pip3, and I can use this next command to see what got installed. So pip version 2021-529. This portion of the lab does use SQLite 3 as the database. So we've shown you the different tables that get installed as part of this. So if we go one more step, and this is probably the last thing I want to show you. So cd into home project, and then git clone the actual code, the legit info code. So as soon as I do that, and let that finish, you'll see if I now open the browser or the file browser in VS Code, here are, once that finishes, here are all my files that come with the git clone, right? And again, you can read through Tony and team, and Tommy did a wonderful job documenting all of this in the different readmes that are in the repo. So take your time, go through that. I'm gonna go into legit info and then create my virtual environment with pipenv shell. And we also, right in here, we did try and describe or put a little bit more writing on what these different things are, right? So pipenv, what is it doing? Pipenv install. And then the one thing I do love that Tony did here was using all these scripts. So you can see here, this command is calling the stage 1 script and passing in an argument. And you can go in here into the files and look at stage 1. So you can just open that and see what's happening there, right? So it's really, it's very open, transparent. And again, I thought this was a great way to learn Django and Python. I learned about Django custom commands and was able to create a new command to add in new states into the solution. So yeah. All right, and then let me, so I'll stop there with the actual going through or doing the lab, but I do want to show you what happens at the end of it. So once you have followed all the directions, you use this launch application button on top, give it a port, and basically you see this. So you'll see the legit info solution that Tony was demoing before. And then the next couple of sections, explore the application, goes through the different panels, the different admin things you can do, exploring different parts of the solution. So that's this whole step. And then we also have, as I mentioned before, we have a step to run this application as a Cloud Foundry application on IBM Cloud. Again, using SQLite 3. We're not hooking into Postgres at this point, but the steps goes through deploying the application on IBM Cloud. And then finally, we have some challenges. So one of the challenges, for example, is update the location. So add a new location. What does that look like? There are other challenges at the bottom as well. Update and impact is another one. So it's a good way. So once you have learned the solution, then you can try some of these challenges. The hope here, apart from the education bit, learning about these different things is also hopefully at the end of, what is this, step 9 of 10, I think.
Step 9, yeah.
Yeah, step 9. So hopefully by the end of it, right, you are at a place where if you wanted to contribute back into the solution, you understand the different components and the technologies that are being used. And it makes it easier for you to hopefully to contribute back. that's it. The next steps then, once you've done this, again, if you want to join the community, Call for Code for Racial Justice community, you can do so by going here. But I also know Demi has a slide on that. And then if you want to see what the team is working on, the different issues that you can pick up, then you can go to this issue section of the repo, right? So let me bring that up real quick. So a lot of these,
nice.
the team has been working on. We also have quite a few of these are actually feature requests and not bugs. So and properly labeled as enhancements. And then Tony's gone through and we have marked quite a few of these as help wanted or good first issue for folks who are new to open source to come to contribute back.
That's great.
So
fantastic.
That was a quick intro to the lab. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, and then I will get the last screen.
All right, so Ukar has done a great job walking us through the lab, and thank you, Tony and Tommy as well for getting us through what legit info is. I also learned a little bit through this, and I have like a lot of ideas as well. You guys have done such a great job with this, and there's a lot more that we can do. I just see so many possibilities where we can take this. So we want people to join us in this effort. So if you're interested in learning more about legit info or a call for code for racial justice in general, you can follow along with the link that should be in the chat. It's also on the screen here. You can use your phone to scan the QR code, and that will basically give you access to our Slack community. First, you will register on through our IBM Cloud platform, and then from there you get information about opting into the Slack community, and then you'll be joining the Racial Justice General channel, and then we'll get you plugged into our solutions. So we are looking for all sorts of skills, whether you're technical or not. As you heard today, we are interested in more like design thinking around these things. If you're a policy expert, you can also lend your voice that way. If you are, of course, a developer, we're definitely welcome your skills there. So do reach out to us, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you, guys.
Fantastic presentation. I really appreciate the issue triage as well. Those good first issue markers are always helpful for a project. So thank you very much for coming and showing us this project and the ways we can give back to it. I think Ohio and Arizona, we need some more states on there, and obviously that's hard because you're right, it's not consistent data coming in, right?
No.
Like it's 50 microcosms of data coming in, or 50 plus actually, given territories and national, federal level type stuff. I mean, I'm trying to ask this without it being too long of a question and response, but what is the data sanitization process look like? I mean, how laborious is that sometime?
Actually, it's all automated now. So we take the PDF file, we extract the text, and we run it through the tool. And occasionally it'll spit out a phrase that we didn't see before. We need to add it to a little list. So we have a list of phrases we've seen and what impact we would associate that with.
Okay.
And other than that, we're seeing about the same 3,000 phrases. So we are able to classify them correctly. Of course, if we add a new state, a new phrase might pop up that we never saw before, and we'd have to make some updates. But we have, it's a table that anyone can edit, a CSV file that says for this phrase, consider it to be part of this impact. And that's what we use to standardize it. And we had to standardize it because we can't process 3,000 phrases.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome though. I mean, what great functionality, right? Like now we can take the project and run with it in our own states potentially. And
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on and demoing this. This is fantastic.
Thank you so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Truly my pleasure. So again, thank you for your efforts. Call for Code for Racial Justice in general. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, I think, Demi. Is that right?
I think that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. There it is. Yeah.
27th, right?
27th. Yep.
Yes.
Cool. So yeah, come back in and we'll be talking more about that more about the other projects in this Call for Code for Racial Justice ecosystem in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.